is November 13th, 2024, and Ukrainian defenses are crumbling, according to Kiev officials who spoke anonymously to Western media, who are admitting that things are not going well on the front lines or in Russia's Kursk region, where Kiev has carried out an ongoing incursion. So, what are they going to do about it? Well, they're faced up against the incoming US president who claims that he is going to end the war in Ukraine. Now, these officials in Kiev seem to think that they are going to put together some sort of offensive, that they are going to hold off Russian forces and convince Trump that they need more support from the US when he comes into office in January. But when it comes to what Trump could do, whether that's just endless support for Kiev, whether it's trying to pull support and end the war, and whether it's trying to present a deal to Russia that they would agree to, there still are countless questions there. Because any possible deal that has been brought up, that has been reported on, again, anonymously in the media, as a possible example of what the Trump team may try to present, it has all been completely unacceptable to Russia, especially when they're in a place when they are currently winning this conflict. So what does that mean for where we go from here, as Trump is announcing his cabinet picks? And while he does have plenty of China hawks and Iran hawks and pro-Israel diehards in his cabinet, he also has some that still have their eye on Russia. And as we know, once a neocon, always a neocon. So where is all of this headed? Well, we got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier. So let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is international relations and security analyst Mark Sleboda. Mark, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Rachel, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Always good to have you. And I'm glad I get to talk to you today because I know that there is a lot going on, and that includes officials from Kiev admitting to the Financial Times that Ukrainian defenses are crumbling in the Donbass amid manpower shortages and the lack of proper training, amid forced conscription efforts. They're also fearing a renewed Russian offensive in Russia's Kursk region, but claiming that if Kiev is able to stop Russian forces by the time Trump takes office in January, then they could prove that they are fighters and winners and help convince the president-elect to stand by them. So what's really at stake here along the front lines and also in the Kursk region?
Sure, if the sun rises from the other side of the earth and sets in the opposite direction, then that could mean something too. But I don't see that there is anywhere that the Kiev regime is even able to hold where Russia is pushing hard. Now, there are a few places on the battlefront where they are holding just barely, or they have slowed Russian progress to a call. But those are not Russia's priority places. If we take a look at the situations in the two big focuses of Russia on the battlefield now, which is the in the Pokrovsk direction, particularly Kharkov, the area in and around Kharkov, Russian forces seem unstoppable at this point. Kiev regime forces are crumbling; they are even collapsing. And in the Kursk region as well, Russia continues to make counteroffensive progress there. But there is also discussion that Russia has finally launched the much forecast and discussed Zaporozhye offensive as well in the direction of Gulyai and the Vremovsky salient, and that could be another major front opening. Russia certainly has enough forces in that area. They were once there as defensive, but as the Kiev regime stripped forces from all its various other fronts to man the Donbass fronts, to man the Kursk incursion, they stripped their forces from the south. And if Russia has a large buildup of forces there and the Kiev regime doesn't, well, then obviously you start planning to go on the offensive. And this will further stretch out the Kiev regime's already vastly overstretched defensive positions particularly in terms of manpower, but equipment as well. So, with a potential major new counteroffensive, like a resurgent counteroffensive that is being discussed in the Kursk region, with Ukrainian officials talking about Russia having gathered some 50,000 troops. Of course, they're still maintaining the, as of yet, completely zero evidence discussion of these invisible North Korean super soldiers that until I see evidence otherwise, I regard as Ghost of Kiev style fan fiction. Not that I would object it if they were involved, but I just see no evidence whatsoever. And as far as I'm concerned, it's still fake news. But another 50,000 being contributed to the Kursk front, and over 100,000 in the Zaporozhye front. Where is the Kiev regime going to find the troops to man these positions? Not in 3 months from now, when they hope to have completed another wave of mobilization, but now, right, over the winter, they can't. So we're going to see this crumbling pick up pace. And of course, there is discussion in the Financial Times and elsewhere that this is Russia and Ukraine battling, fiercely now because Trump was just elected and they're trying to make facts on the ground. The Russian government couldn't be more clear. They don't care that Trump was elected. It doesn't change anything in their military calculus. Maybe in their political calculus, they're talking about it behind closed doors. Certainly, I would be surprised if they weren't. But as far as they're concerned, it makes absolutely no difference at the end of the day whether it's Donald Trump sitting in the White House in January or Kamala Harris. The special military operation will continue. It will continue doing what it's doing until it realizes all of its goals. If it meets them diplomatically, even better. But right now, that doesn't seem to be in the cards. I still don't think it's in the cards. And if there is an acceleration, it's just a trend that is already occurring. It's not Russia preparing for the change of power in the United States. That's hubris. To think that everyone makes decisions based on the results of the election in the U.S. No, Russia is doing what they've already been doing, and their pace has already been accelerating because the Kiev regime forces are crumbling, and in places collapsing, and in places barely holding. But that's what's happening on the battlefield, and I don't think that it changes because Trump was elected in any conceivable way.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, this thought that, oh, just because the US is getting a new president for the next 4 years, it's like, really? 4 years? But at the same time, US foreign policy does not drastically change from one administration to the next. We've seen that over the course of decades. We've also seen that from Obama to Trump to Biden back to Trump. And you look at his current cabinet, who he has appointed so far, they're all neocons. They may not be as Russia focused, at least some of them, but they're neocons in other ways, right? They want war with China, war with Iran. They want to support Israel. It's like there's no major changes coming from the US, not even enough to make Russia think, well, wait a second. Are things going to be different with Washington? It's like, no, they've seen this story before. I do think it's interesting, speaking of leaders and maybe some possible changes. We've got anonymous Ukrainian officials also talking to The Economist, and once again noting that Zelensky is the emperor with no clothes, right? He's being kept in the dark entirely on how bad the situation on the front lines is, with one official even saying it's not even that he's being kept in a warm bath, he's being kept in a sauna. Now, it's no secret that the rest of the world knows that if an election was held in Ukraine tomorrow, Zelensky would not be the favorite. But how do you view the current situation, and how likely are things on the political spectrum to fall apart in Ukraine when it comes to Zelensky as this reigning dictator?
Yeah, I'm not so sure I believe that story about Zelensky being big, having no idea what's really happening on the front lines, and simply having hot air blown up. I mean, he's got his military, he's got his military intelligence, which reports on the military situation on both sides. I would imagine that he's hearing things not only directly from his generals but from other people as well, and I think that he is more than likely perfectly aware what is happening. If the generals were lying to him, like say the way they are to the Western media all along, then surely he would have noticed at some point in the last nearly 3 years that he has been steadily lied to. I
Right.
I'm just not so sure I buy that narrative. Whether he is fully cognizant and of what is happening on the battlefield, or he is some type of completely isolated, delusional emperor with no clothes, it really doesn't make much of a difference at this point, because nothing he is doing or can do can change that calculus on the battlefield. Doubtless, as he and his generals, Sersky, Budanov, and others, get more desperate, we can expect more attempts at dirty tricks, at asymmetric responses, at trying to frantically look for a way out of the kill box that they are finding themselves in. I'm sure they have some surprises left, much as a few months ago, the Kursk incursion appears to have come as a surprise, at least in its size and scale to Russia. But it was dealt with, and whatever the Kiev regime or its patrons come up with in the next few months. But even as Trump is presumably working on a deal, which I don't believe he can come up with any deal that the Russians would accept. And then, of course, I'm worried about how he will respond, how his neocons that he's gathering to him will tell him to respond. When Putin does say no, uh, why would we take that? We're winning. You're trying to reward us with what we've already taken. No, you're not a third party to this conflict. You are a party to this conflict, and you are a party on the losing side, and you are bluffing, because all your talk about flooding Ukraine with more weapons, you don't have them, right? You're not going to send troops.
Mhm.
I can't conceive of Russia backing down from U.S. threats at this point, which doesn't mean that the U.S. won't respond, but it just means that I don't think that they'll respond adequately. Inevitably, Mike Waltz and Marco Rubio, if he is the Secretary of State, David Hespeth, and others will tell Trump, you need to escalate to de escalate, because you have to force Putin to accept your deal if you want out of this conflict. And that may lead us to a situation just as bad or even worse than where we were with the Biden Kamala Harris, administration. So I just don't see any silver lining, any utopia on the horizon, any kumbaya moment. I think this conflict will continue, and as the Kiev regime starts to collapse, both militarily and perhaps even support for it politically, it will get nastier and more desperate. We've heard the Europeans' panicked response to just the potential for Trump to step to try to push an end to the conflict on whatever terms. The Boris Johnson has said that if in the last 48 hours, that if Trump pulls aid from Ukraine, then the United Kingdom will have to send troops to defend Kiev against Russia directly. We have heard from the top Polish general that Poland needs to prepare for war with Russia. And we have heard in Germany from the leader of the Christian Democratic Union, Menzer, who is likely to head up the next German government. The German government coalition has collapsed. There will be snap elections, I believe, in February, and almost certainly the Christian Democratic Union, which is even a a more fervent supporter of the Kiev regime than Olaf Scholz's SPD and coalition has been. He's already said that he wants to send Taurus cruise missiles to Kiev, which means Germany wants to fire missiles directly deep into Russia. All we're hearing from the Europeans is escalation. Trump is surrounding himself by neocons, and no one can tell me what deal Trump would and could offer Russia that the Russian government would accept at this point. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't see anything positive on the horizon. I think Trump may find himself much harder to extricate himself and the U.S. from this conflict than he might have believed it was or told us it was on the campaign trail. I'm not talking 24 hours. I'm talking at all.
Yeah, I'm glad that you bring that up, because that's been my biggest question this entire time when Trump is claiming, oh, I'm going to come in and I'm just going to end the war. I'm going to make these two leaders talk to each other, even though for Zelensky, he's made that illegal for himself. But he seems to think that he's just going to strong arm Putin and Zelensky into some sort of an agreement. And it's like, okay, either you haven't been paying attention whatsoever over the last 3-4 years, or you really do believe what you're selling. And that is extremely concerning when it comes to someone like Trump, who is so ego driven that, yeah, the moment that Putin tells him no, and he has all these neocons in his ear telling him, hey, you've just got to put more pressure on Putin, it's like, this is not going to end well. Not only is it not going to lead to some sort of agreement, but I'm with you. I don't know what the US could offer Russia at this point. And they're not even really, with the alleged reported agreements that are kind of being floated around in the media, they're not even trying, right? Being like, oh, we'll just keep Ukraine out of NATO for 20 years, as if Russia is going to look at that and go, oh, that buys us 2 decades of not having.
And they'll keep pumping them full of weapons while they're doing it, right? Yeah, Russia. Those are not even serious. They're actually an insult to the situation. They're in complete denial of the situation on the battlefield. And I just, when I hear that Mike Waltz is confirmed as the national security advisor, and Mike Waltz did photo ops with Azov praising them back in 2022, I don't get any type of warm fuzzy. I think there's too much. I'm afraid there is too much projection from people in the alternative media of their positions regarding wanting an end to this conflict on to Trump. They're putting too much on him simply because he surrounded himself with Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. and Tucker Carlson during the election campaign. Those are not the people that are in his decision-making circles as he will make his transition team and his appointments to fill those positions. And I think we've all seen before that Trump is guided to a very large degree by whoever whispered and flattered in his ear in the last 15 minutes what he does. And we saw it in the first Trump administration, when there actually were people included in his team in the beginning that were not neocons, that were removed. General Flynn was he wanted to bring him in as national security advisor, and say Rex Tillerson as Secretary of State. Say what you want about Rex Tillerson. I've got lots to say of him, as the head of a giant oil company and so forth. But in terms of Secretary of State, he was actually a realist. he refused to use the human rights weaponization against other countries hypocritically. And there was even a leaked memo that tried to explain to him, right? Human rights are what we use against our enemies, whereas our friends, right, this was, released in the Western media. Our friends, Israel and so on, we don't discuss those situations. Rex Tillerson bucked that. He wanted to do as a transaction-based realist, and he was removed. He was sidelined and then removed from office as well. So Trump doesn't even seem to be bothering with that this time. He's just going straight neocon flat out, as far as we can tell so far. And those are the people who will be advising him and presenting information to him. And Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. are not going to be anywhere close, I hate to say. That's the reality. That's maybe that's too cynical, but considering that is what happened in the previous administration, this is the course of the U.S. Anything else at this point has to be considered just hope, and I don't do hope.
Yeah, it's like you look at him and that's the thing. Trump campaigns exceptionally well, right? He makes it look like he's going to take on the establishment. He's going to end the endless wars. Exactly. He's going to do something different. And then he gets into office. I mean, it's been a week that he's been president-elect, and already we're looking at his cabinet going, yeah, he had you fooled once again. Now, I do think it's interesting. One last thing I will note is that Fox News is claiming that Trump has not forgotten about his promise on ending the war in Ukraine, right? He has appointed all of these people for his cabinet who are anti-Iran, anti-China, pro-Israel. Mike Wells seems to be the only one who's still really hawkish on Russia. I guess the day is young there. But according to Fox News, Trump is going to appoint a Ukraine peace envoy soon. And their anonymous source was quoted as saying, "You're going to see a very senior special envoy, someone with a lot of credibility, who will be given a task to find a resolution to get a peace settlement." Now, that almost sounds like Trump himself. Maybe they just talked to him. But they also noted that this position is on a volunteer basis. They're not even giving a salary to this Ukraine peace envoy that they are going to be announcing. When it comes to the next few months, I know there's going to be a big focus on the Middle East, a growing focus on China. Do you have any predictions for how things go with Ukraine, how hawkish the Trump administration gets, and also how quickly that happens?
Unfortunately, I just don't think the situation in Russia is going to go away, right? This was the Biden administration's dream, right? They were going to finish Russia off quickly, ignore the Middle East, and pivot hard and confront China. That was the Biden administration dream. Obviously, my dear boy, none of that happened, right? They couldn't deal with Russia. The Middle East flared up, and they never, even got close, to pivoting to China. Trump, obviously, at some level, he wants to close down the conflict in Ukraine, but he also wanted to pull U.S. troops out of Syria and proved completely unable to do so. They're still there now, by the way. So, and suddenly we started hearing from Trump that they were there for the oil. Well, they weren't there for the oil, although that's some icing on the cake. But whatever it took, to get him to acquiesce, whatever smoke they had to blow up his rear end, it obviously worked. So I expect the same situation, because whatever they may want otherwise, when Putin says no, I just can't conceive that he will be able to just wash his hands of the Kiev regime and walk away, because he's the US president. He now owns it. And it will be, you have to escalate to de-escalate. If we just walk away, what lessons will China and Iran take away from that? And Trump may find himself quagmire, stuck down in conflict with Russia that may actually get hotter, even potentially. And his dreams of helping Israel finish off the Palestinians and Iran, or dealing with China, may find themselves put on the back burner for a time that may just drag on into well into those 4 years. So he's potentially facing a trap. I think we'll be able to perhaps take a lot from who he appoints as this supposed peace envoy. Maybe that will, bring me to some reassessment. But maybe we'll see someone is equally as frightening as Waltz or Hespeth or somebody being thrown in there, and they will find themselves constrained by the reality as well. What do they offer Putin that Putin would accept? I just can't see them offering anything. The best they could probably do is walk away, but I just don't think they can do that. And Europe has said they're going to escalate anyway. I don't think Trump can even push successfully Zelensky, whom is completely out of his rocker at this point. He will just rely on the Europe and continue fighting, more than likely, much less Putin, right? And Putin feels that he is in the driver's seat, and they don't want to fight this war again in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years or whatever. They want it settled on their terms. Well, however long it takes to do that.
Yeah, I still feel like the plot twist is going to be Mike Walls is the Ukraine peace envoy, and the picture announcing it is the one where he's with the members of Azov, and they're like, look, this is our guy who's going to bring peace to the conflict, because at this point, that's about where we're headed. I know that there is certainly a lot at stake here all around. A cold dose of reality everyone will, well, hopefully eventually catch up to. But I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. International relations and security analyst Mark Sleboda, thanks so much for your time and insight.
Thanks for having me.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you can find new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also check out Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. That's where you can participate in regular polls and Q&As and contribute to my work. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.